Welcome, folks. Thanks for joining us for our virtual creativity workshop. Today, we're going to be designing some birdhouses. I'm going to take a few moments to introduce our project and introduce the materials that we need before we get started. So to start off, probably the most important, we need our birdhouse. This is something that if you'd like to repeat this project, you could find at the dollar store pretty easily. We also need some paint. So I've given us white, green, yellow, and blue paint. If you have other ones at home, you're welcome to try different colors. Along with our paint, we need a paintbrush and a little bit of water. I always have to remind myself not to drink that one, that's just for the paint. And then finally, we need for our roof, you can see on our finished birdhouses, we added some fabric for shingles. So you have a couple of bags of fabric here, and I gave us some green fabric, some orange, and some blue. So that will be what we need for this project. Like I said before, if you wanted to try this again by yourself, you could find tissue paper instead of the fabric. So that's one thing you could substitute out. And in that case, you wouldn't use fabric glue, you would use just regular glue to attach that to the roof. One last thing, you might want to have some tissue paper handy. When you switch between your paint colors, it can be nice to just dry off or get that extra paint off. And I guess one more final thing, you might want to cover your workspace in newspaper or a tablecloth, just to keep it protected and so your space isn't covered in paint. All right, folks, once you have all of the things that you need for our workshop, we're going to get started. And we're going to start with the roof. We're going to glue some of our fabric squares on to make our shingles. But before we do that, we're gonna change the view that you get through the camera. So instead of looking at me, you're gonna get a bit of a bird's eye view so that you can follow along in your own space. We're gonna start by decorating the roof of our birdhouse. So you'll need your fabric glue close by and the pieces of fabric. I'm gonna show you how to attach the fabric onto the roof. We're going to start with this lowest level of the roof. To start off, if the lid is still on your fabric glue, you'll take that off. And then find a spot, it can be wherever you like, on this first section. You're just going to add one small dab of glue. And then you get to decide whichever color you like to add onto this first section. You'll notice I let this piece of fabric hang over the edge of the roof. There's a little bit of space here, and that was on purpose because we're going to do 2 layers of this fabric. Once this is glued on, you'll see that it really only took a little push to press it on there. You can decide, do you want to continue with the same color fabric, or do you want to make a pattern, or maybe just whatever's closest to you. I am going to continue with the same color just for now. You're going to continue the same way. I put a dab of glue on, and then I'm going to press my fabric onto that glue. And you'll continue with this process until this first layer of fabric is put down. You might, as you press down onto the fabric, feel the glue come through a little bit, and that's okay. If you find it gets a little bit too sticky, you're always welcome to wash your hands in between. You'll see here, it took about 4 pieces of fabric to cover this one section. So that might be a good marker for you to see how many you need. It might take less if the pieces are bigger, more if they're smaller. But once you have this first layer on, then we're going to put one just over top. So this layer of glue, you might press kind of onto that point where the wood and fabric meet. It could be a little bit lower or higher, just as long as it lets you put this next piece of fabric a bit higher up on the roof. So now you can see you've got a couple of layers of fabric. You'll continue on with this, making your way along the roof. If at any point you decide, I'd like to throw a different color in there, you are more than welcome to do that. Like me, for example, I think this one is going to be green. And you can decide to do something similar, or you can continue same color all the way through. This is where you get to showcase your creativity. Don't worry too much if you see that your fabric's doing kind of something similar to mine where the edges maybe don't quite line up. That's okay. They can fall however they get put on. If you are worried about them all lining up, you can always trim them off after. We're going to continue on like this until this whole side of the roof is covered. So you might decide once you get to this next section, you want to change the color. I'm going to continue on with this orange for the most part. And I think maybe every so often I'll change colors, maybe to green or to the blue. You'll notice that it really doesn't take a lot of glue to hold the fabric onto the roof here. Each one is maybe pea-sized to stick on. If you add more, that's okay too. You want just enough so that your fabric won't fall off the roof as you add it. And you'll continue the same way. You'll notice I left that space again right up at the top. And this way you can add your second layer onto this section. This square felt like it needed to be blue, so I changed up the color there. If at any point you feel like I'm moving too fast and you need to catch up with this video, you can always pause it and wait until you catch up to the point that I'm at and then continue on. Also, if it looks like I'm moving really slowly and you're speeding ahead of me, feel free to skip ahead to the section that you're at now. So we've got one more section here where we're going to do 2 layers. This last one we're going to leave at 1 layer. So we'll keep going with our roof, adding a dab of glue and our pieces of fabric. The reason I like to add the glue right onto the birdhouse is because then you see where you need to press the fabric onto. If you put the glue onto the fabric, it might be harder to see where it is when you're putting it on the roof, and it might not stick where you think it's going to. So that's why I like putting the glue right onto the roof and sticking the fabric on there. We've got one more row here. We left that space again so we could do 2 rows or 2 layers. And keeping an eye out, I feel like this one maybe feels like a different color again. So I'll add some green in there. Once you've finished off this row, you'll see that we have one more section that's still uncovered, but it's a little bit smaller. So for this top section, you'll just have one row of fabric. And I think I'm going to do this a different color. And I think it will be blue. I'm going to use blue for this section. But the same idea generally applies. You're going to put a little dab of glue onto the roof. This time though, you're going to try to put your fabric so it covers this whole section. So rather than leaving space so that you can see a little bit, you're going to cover the whole thing. And then you'll continue on with whatever color you choose. I'm choosing to use just blue, but again, you might choose to make a pattern. You might pick up whatever fabric's closest to you. This is your creative project, so you get to decide how it looks. Here we go. Once we add that last piece, let's take a moment to admire our first side of our birdhouse. Once you've finished this side of the roof of your birdhouse, let's flip our birdhouse around and do the same thing on the other side. Same idea. We're going to use our glue, add a little dab onto the roof, and then add some of our fabric. Just a reminder, for these first 3 steps of the roof or levels, we're gonna keep a bit of space so that we can have 2 layers. So we'll add our first layer on. Making our way across the roof. One thing I may not have mentioned, but you probably saw me doing, is overlapping the squares of fabric just a little bit. So when I add this next one, you'll see that the edge overlaps onto the previous piece of fabric. That way the whole section is covered. Let's do the same thing onto our second layer. I'm going to switch it up and add some blue here. But you get to decide what colors and if you use any patterns for your roof. And we'll keep going this way, doing 2 layers of fabric for these next 2 sections of the roof as well. You might be completing this creative project with a loved one in your house or a special person to you. And this could be a nice opportunity to talk about other times you've seen birds outside. Maybe you're a bird watcher by hobby and you've seen some really interesting ones lately. This could be a nice moment to share that with the person that you're with. You might also be completing this project by yourself, and it might be reminding you of times that you've spent outside, times you've enjoyed nature or natural spaces, maybe times you've seen birds or other animals outside your home. It might be a time for you to reflect and reminisce on some of those experiences. I'm going to give this reminder again, but if you're finding that I'm moving too quickly and you need more time to catch up to the point that I'm at, you can pause this video and then catch up later. If I'm not going fast enough, you can skip ahead